Welcome to our Friday National Huddle on Branding and Networking. We are excited to have you join us today. And before I get into introducing, I just wanted to share, I'm Stephanie Murphy. I'm the Senior Program Manager for our Salesforce Fellowship Program and your moderator today. And just be sure you're putting all your questions in the Q&A, not in the chat. We're going to do our best to answer as many questions as possible, and we'll definitely be doing some of them live. But now to introduce our guest today, we have David Nava from Salesforce, and he is known in the Salesforce space as Flight Suit to Golden Hoodie. 20-year naval officer in the family business, 17 times certified as a Salesforce lead engineer, and he has that extra special golden hoodie. And for those who do not know, there's only 50 rock stars globally out of 10 million Trailblazers that have earned that. So Iris and I know him as the most sincere, hardworking, giving professional of those leaving the military, and especially in the Salesforce ecosystem. So it's our honor today to have you here, David. Thanks for your time. We know you're very busy, and I'll give you the reins and help you out with questions as we go.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Stephanie. I appreciate it. Just confirm you can hear me and you can see my screen.
We can.
Okay, excellent. All right. Hey, everyone. Like Stephanie mentioned, Dave Nava here. I'm honored to be able to speak with you today. As she mentioned, I retired from the Navy in 2019 after serving for 20 years, and I moved to a career in the technology industry, specifically cloud computing with Salesforce. So as most of you would probably agree, transitioning from the military was one of the most challenging and stressful periods of my life. Not only did I have to redefine my professional purpose, I was grappling with a new social identity as a civilian as well. And I honestly found myself ill-equipped to make sense of the confusing job marketplace. I knew that I needed to develop a network and a personal brand, but I had no clue how to get started. And so during that year up to my retirement, I was able to develop a robust personal brand and network, which I then leveraged to find my dream job. So today's presentation is focused on how to build your brand, leverage that brand to network within your chosen industry, and find your dream job. I hope the concepts we discussed today will be helpful during your transition journey. And what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to come on video mute to help preserve some bandwidth, and I'll turn my video back on once we get to the questions section. And so before we dive into the presentation, I think it's helpful to understand a little bit about my background. So in 2018, I had spent the previous 4 years, literally thousands of hours, prepping for a career in project management before realizing that there was no passion or joy for me in that path. At that time, I had about a year until I retired from the military, and I was raising my 2 youngest sons by myself, and I didn't know how I was going to make ends meet next year. As a 4th-generation sailor, military life was literally all that I knew, and so I began to panic. Through my network, I discovered a promising opportunity in the tech industry that piqued my interest, and I decided to pursue it. The problem was, as mentioned, I had no tech background, no tech experience, and my professional network was extremely disorganized. I had 12 months to build a relevant network, train myself, gain work experience, and ultimately get hired into a full-time role with a decent salary. No problem, right? And my goal here was to avoid the trap that many transitioning service members and spouses fall into when negotiating their career path. And this may be familiar to you. They apply for dozens of jobs, they get a few interviews, and if they're lucky, they receive one job offer that they often immediately accept due to lack of choices and perhaps desperation. I was going to flip that script. I was going to have companies come to me with job offers, and that is exactly what happened. Now, you may be wondering to yourself, okay, cool. How can this information help me on my professional journey? Beginning a career or transitioning from one career field to another is hard. You need to establish a reputation, build relationships, and get noticed by recruiters and hiring managers in the companies that you're interested in. Opportunities don't happen by accident. They happen by design. Developing a robust personal brand and communicating that brand to your network helps with each of these requirements. Now, the concepts we'll be discussing today are not industry specific. They're grounded in human nature and they're universal. So over the next 40 minutes or so, I'm going to teach you how to flip that script and have companies bring the job offers to you. During today's discussion, I'll be covering two key concepts that'll prove foundational to your transition journey: networking and branding. As you're probably aware, the military does not adequately prepare you to engage in either of these critical activities. It's not part of your mission. Once you leave the military, whether you're a service member or a spouse, your mission changes dramatically. Your new mission, find gainful employment in the civilian job marketplace, absolutely depends upon a solid understanding and implementation of these core concepts. My goal today is not to exhaustively cover networking and branding theory and practice. That could honestly be a university course spanning an entire semester. Rather, my goal is to convince you that networking and branding is critical to your post-military success, and then provide you with a simple framework and the tools to get started. And so while the examples I'll be sharing with you today primarily concern online networking and branding, rest assured, these principles apply across all forms of interaction. I want this to be an open conversation instead of a lecture. Like, I don't want to talk at you. So if you have questions during the presentation, post them in chat. And then after I go to each new slide, I'll pause for a second. And Stephanie and Iris and others will help me surface those questions so I can best answer them. So with that, let's go ahead and get started. Now, to set the stage, I want to give you a couple different perspectives on personal brand and branding. We have to have some definitions first. The Harvard Business Review defines a brand as, quote, how you want people to see you and the values that you represent, end quote. I like to think of it as the sum of your unique professional and personal values, skills, interests, and goals that communicate your value to others within your professional community. In short, it's your professional narrative or story. All right, let's move on to branding. An online definition for branding, and this one's a long one, quote, how you project your brand and its values to the world and ensure that your target audience knows who you are, what you stand for, and why it's worth choosing you over your competitors. I would simplify it. I'd say it's activities designed to communicate your personal brand to others to accomplish your goals. Now, if you think about it, one of the best tools for assessing your brand is Google. That's the tool that many people will use to get a feel for who you are and what you represent. And that includes recruiters and hiring managers. So when you get a moment, if you haven't already, Google yourself in the context of your profession and see what turns up. If your search results don't turn up much, what does that tell you about your brand? And just as an experiment, if you have a separate screen, Google David Nava, Salesforce, and see what turns up. All right. So now that we've defined brand and branding, let's examine why you should devote time to both. Your brand needs to be deeply connected to your professional why. Your why is the summation of your career goals and aspirations. It's what you're passionate about and what drives you. Once you understand this about yourself, you're ready to define what you hope to accomplish with the brand. You know, when I ask people who don't have a brand why they haven't taken the time to create one, their answers often indicate that they're not convinced it's worth the investment of time. This tells me they haven't yet connected with their why. The purpose of this slide, it's blank right now, but it's going to change, is to briefly cover some common reasons for developing a brand. Because your brand is going to be the primary tool that you use to grow your network and develop a professional reputation within your chosen industry. Now, these reasons may not apply to you now. Some of them won't apply until later. I bring them up so that you can apply them and consider them in the future as your goals and your brand evolve, and they will. Many people's primary reason for branding, and likely yours sitting here today, is to unlock career success. When you're focused on opening doors and creating opportunities for yourself, you need to communicate the value that you can bring to an organization. In this case, you want to get the attention of recruiters and hiring managers when you're applying for roles. Now think about it, they may be sifting through hundreds of candidates for one position. So you have very little time to get your message across. Your value is demonstrated by your education and training, your work experience, your volunteer efforts, your awards, etc. Therefore, your goal should be to convey this information as quickly and effectively as possible. On LinkedIn and on your resume, this means carefully crafting your headline and the introduction sections, because these will be the first and maybe the only things that talent professionals quickly scan as they search for candidates. Your goal is to get them to pause, become interested, and linger longer than the traditional 6 seconds. Another common reason to brand is to promote a personal business. And when your focus is on growing your business, the spotlight should be on the value that your business can bring to your potential customers. So I'm talking to the entrepreneurs out there. Your business's value is therefore demonstrated by what your customers are saying about your products and services. Again, your goal is to broadcast that information succinctly and effectively. Giving back has become a foundational practice that helps define the culture of many professional communities, including mine. By creating a brand around your volunteering efforts, you're able to expand the reach of the service that you're providing to the professional community. And in doing so, you're also able to enhance your brand. And finally, it's not uncommon for employees who believe deeply in the mission of their company to act as brand ambassadors. I'm a brand ambassador for Salesforce. I help to further the corporate branding message. And you'll see this when these folks reshare corporate posts on social media, or they create original posts espousing the company's values, sharing its accomplishments, and describing the virtues of its products and services. Now, while the primary purpose is to enhance the brand of their employer, in doing so, they're also defining and advancing their personal brand. So it's a win-win. What prevents you from branding? Think about this as we're going through this slide today. Why aren't you branding right now if you're not? In my mentoring sessions, my mentees have shared some common barriers. We're going to examine each of the ones that I've seen, and then we'll see what can be done to mitigate them. And if you have others, please bring those up. All right. Lack of knowledge. Branding does not come to most of us naturally, as I mentioned. And unless you've sought out and taken a course on it, you may not know how to do it. We're going to walk through a simple process for getting started on the next slide, which should help break down this barrier. Lack of content. Even with a process in place, you have to share your content if you want to promote your brand. And for those that are just getting started, this can be daunting. What should you share? I recommend a crawl, walk, run methodology for content creation. At the crawl stage, ask thoughtful questions and broadcast your achievements using social media like LinkedIn. Simply asking a question or posting when you earn a certification is a great way to receive reactions and comments on your post and begin to get your name out there as someone who's passionate about learning. At the walk stage, repost and reshare content, obviously ensuring that you give credit where it's due. Helping others get their message out by resharing is an excellent way to build relationships with thought leaders who will likely support your content in the future. It's also a quick and easy way to generate content, frankly. And then finally, at the run stage, create original content. This can be lessons learned from a recent project or your thoughts on an industry trend. And I've seen many beginners create original content based on the questions they have about their industry. The possibilities are literally endless. If you're looking for ideas, research what other professionals in your industry are posting on LinkedIn. Easy to do. Lack of self-awareness. As we discussed earlier, a brand is based on your values, attributes, and goals. So if you haven't given thought to these and mapped them out, you're going to struggle with creating a brand. To mitigate this issue, you need to conduct some self-focused research to generate insights into what makes you, you. And for help with this, PwC, PricewaterhouseCoopers, created a personal brand workbook that provides detailed exercises for crafting your brand. The link is in this presentation, and that will be shared with you. Fear of failure. There's an unnecessary stigma attached to failure. Honestly, it's part of the learning process, and I see it as a gift that shows us what doesn't work and propels us toward what does. So fail early and fail fast. Learn from it and apply the knowledge to bettering your efforts. Grit is not measured by success. It's measured by how many times you pick yourself back up and keep going. Fear of vulnerability. I get it. Sharing your thoughts, your opinions, your perspective opens you up to criticism. What if others don't agree with your point of view? What if they think that what you have to offer is not valuable? Creating and sharing content requires you to be vulnerable, which requires courage. Find the confidence to lean into being vulnerable and don't worry about what others will think. You deserve the right to be able to show up as your authentic self, flaws and all. People will appreciate your courage and your honesty. Uncomfortability with branding. No one likes someone who brags all the time. I get that. Knowing that it can be uncomfortable trumpeting our successes and promoting ourselves. We don't want to be seen as arrogant and self-interested. There's a monumental difference between bragging and branding. Branding is not about convincing everyone how great you are. It's about communicating the value that your experience and your expertise can bring to an organization. We all have value, so don't be afraid to share it. Procrastination. For all the reasons we just mentioned, it can be hard to get started. It is so much easier to tell ourselves that we'll start our branding strategy tomorrow or the next day. To get past this roadblock and other roadblocks in your life, frankly, use a forcing function. A forcing function forces us to be accountable to our goals by creating a publicly shared milestone. For example, schedule your brand launch date on your calendar and share the news with friends, colleagues, or your significant other. Committing to a specific date with others makes it harder to back out when you reach that milestone. Now that we've worked out how to get past these common branding barriers, next we need a process for putting our brand into play. Like anything else, creating a brand can be broken down into a series of interconnected steps. The first step, define your personal values. What do you stand for? What is important to you? This is the foundation upon which you'll build your brand. So create a list of your values to get started. Next comes the personal and professional qualities that you've gained over the course of your experiences. What are you good at? You'll be leveraging these to demonstrate your brand. Create a list of those as well. Next, you need goals. What do you want to accomplish? You should have well thought out near-term and long-term goals. These will define why you're creating a brand and what you hope to accomplish with it. When defining your goals, ensure you use the SMART framework, as it increases the likelihood that you'll achieve them. And if you're not already familiar with that acronym, SMART goals are specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, and time-bound. Your branding statement encapsulates your values, qualities, and goals into a single sentence that succinctly communicates your value. Think of it as your personal mission statement. It should be clear to anyone reading it what the essence of your brand is. Next, you'll need to set aside time each day to plan and create the content that you'll use to convey your branding statement to your target audience. Carving out this time and protecting it by not allowing other activities to encroach is crucial to your branding strategy. Once you've developed your content, you need to choose the channels where you'll share it with your audience. These can be social media or they can be professional gatherings, both online or in person. There's dozens of channels out there, so you need to choose wisely and deliberately. I recommend starting on LinkedIn. Often the hardest part of the process is actually launching your brand. At some point, you have to throw caution to the wind and commit. Once you do, it becomes easier and easier then to bring new content to life. What you say and who you direct your message to will depend on your goals. If you're looking for direction on this, we can discuss that during the Q&A after the presentation. Your first, second, 20th posts may not generate the intended response, and that is totally okay. It's going to take time, experimentation, and iteration to create quality content that engages your audience. Don't lose patience, don't lose heart, you will get there. Once you've launched your brand and you've built it up, what happens next? Should it evolve and change over time, or should it remain the same? We're going to tackle that on a future slide. All right. Was there a question out there?
Yes, there is a question.
Awesome.
So Hannah was curious, back to how you explored the process of a good career. You mentioned project management was not for you. How did you come to that? Did you use metrics to come to that decision? How did you get to that point?
Yeah, so I did it the hard way, which I don't recommend. The way that I did it was having talks with recruiters. And up to that point, I had my PMP, my Lean Six Sigma black belt, I had an MBA, I had all the trappings, but I'd never thought about it deeply. And so they're like, cool, Dave, like you look awesome on paper. What do you want to do? What industry, what company, what role, what kind of project manager? And I was like, I don't know. I just want to manage projects. I have no idea. And so because I couldn't answer their questions, I was forced to look back on myself and ultimately realize, wow, I don't really want to be a project manager. So what I recommend doing is, and I'll share this resource later, is doing that deep dive on yourself to figure out what resonates with you and to choose wisely. There's a book out there that I'll recommend that you can get started. And then once you kind of have that narrowed down, then you do informational interviews. And I'm going to talk about informational interviews as well on a future slide. And that will further narrow it down so you don't make the mistake that I made where I spent 4 years spinning my wheels.
Right. That was the only question we have right now.
Okay, awesome. Good question. So moving on, before we explore how to network, and we need to establish what a network is. And so we were defining branding before, now we're going to define networking. We also need to talk about, honestly, why you should invest the time required to develop and build a network. So Again, the dictionary defines networking. It's boring. The action or process of interacting with others to exchange information and develop professional or social contacts. Okay, great. While technically correct, this definition is limited and does not highlight the why behind networking. I would offer a different term or different definition of the term. I define it as remote or in-person activities undertaken to reach out to and converse with relevant members of a current or desired professional community in order to build an enduring relationship to establish a bi-directional exchange of value. It's a lot of stuff there. We're going to unpack it. So now that we've identified a couple different perspectives on what networking is, why should you care? I'm going to make a bold statement. Networking is the single most important activity that you can engage in to support your professional success, period. By the end of this presentation, my goal and my hope is that you will agree with me. This is going to necessarily require both a cultural and a mental shift. So as a service member or military spouse, the use of social media tools were likely frowned upon, right? When you were in the military, these tools had the ability to compromise the safety of your unit. In leaving the military, you also need to leave behind that paradigm and shift your outlook of these tools and practices. Not only are they universally accepted in the civilian world, they're absolutely essential for professional success, especially when moving to a new industry, role, or company. Why? Why is that? What makes these activities so critical? All right, to explain why, I'm going to read you a quote from former SecDef Donald Rumsfeld that you're probably already familiar with. Here we go, quote, "Because as we know, there are known knowns, things we know we know. We also know there are known unknowns. That is to say, we know there are some things we do not know, but there are also unknown unknowns, the ones we don't know," end quote. Let's put that in the current context. Within your immediate network, there are opportunities you're likely aware of. Perhaps it's a job as a contractor at the same organization you worked at while you were on active duty or in the same line of work. This is a known known. You know about the job and you likely know how to pursue it. Then there are opportunities that you know exist, but you're not sure how to prepare for or pursue them. For example, you've heard that tech is a great industry and cloud computing is hot. You have no idea how to go about getting a job in that sector. That is a known unknown. And finally, there are opportunities that you've never heard of or been exposed to. Some of these opportunities are perfect for you and your skill sets, but sadly, you will never know about them. These are the unknown unknowns. Your network connects you to all of these opportunities. For the known knowns, you simply reach out to your buddy who's already in that role and you ask for an employee referral. For the known unknowns, you're able to canvas your network and put together informational interviews, and we'll get to that more later, Hannah, to fill in the gaps and gain valuable information and insights. And for those pesky unknown unknowns that you don't even know to ask for, these are going to pop into your social media feed. They're going to be mentioned to you in a direct message or DM by your mentors and connections, or they will literally fall into your lap by a recruiter, like they did for me, in your network, who identifies you as a great fit for the role and reaches out. That's how I got my job at Salesforce. The stronger your network, the more likely you are to have access to the known knowns, to have resources to research the known unknowns, and have connections reach out to identify the unknown unknowns. The reverse is also true. Now think about that. Why would you not want to be exposed to more opportunities to find the company and role that aligns perfectly with your values and your professional vision? I'm going to leave you with one more quote that's been attributed to multiple different people over the years. Your network is your net worth, and it's absolutely true. If you still think that in the midst of uncertain market conditions, the post-pandemic economy, layoffs in the tech industry, that you don't need every advantage you can get your hands on, stay tuned. I've lived these truths. I'm living them right now as we're laying off folks. We'll be exploring my journey in a moment to underscore and validate everything I'm saying to you right now. All right, now that we've defined what a network is and why it's critical to your success, we're going to dispel some common misperceptions about networking. I'll just pause for questions and see if there's any.
All right. We don't have any yet.
Great.
You're doing a great job. There's no questions so far.
Excellent. Either there was sleep or I'm answering all the questions. So there's likely some of you out there who are like, I'm hesitant to begin networking because it makes me feel uncomfortable. Maybe there's something unsavory about it. Perhaps it feels forced, fake, or unnatural. Nothing should be further from the truth. It should never be viewed or treated as a means to an end. If done correctly, there is no end to networking. Don't look at it as asking for a handout. As I mentioned, networking is based upon a bi-directional exchange of value. Asking for something without adding value to the relationship is not what networking is about. Networking is not fake, it's not forced, and it's not phony. It's engaging with others in a forthright, honest, and sincere manner. So I'd challenge you to reframe your perspective of networking and see it for what it truly is. Effective networking is goal-driven, iterative, and it constantly evolves. It's undertaken with a clear purpose in mind. As your career develops, so too should your networking goals. Let's look at a natural progression. Initially, you're connecting with people in the roles that you're interested in to learn more about the industry. Then you land a full-time role. Your goal could then change to moving vertically within that company by developing relationships with internal leaders. Networking adds value and clarity to every professional goal to which it's applied. Rather than asking for a handout, effective networking is instead focused on adding value to your professional interactions. In order for the other person to be willing to assist you with your professional goals, you must first be willing to support their goals. For example, when you ask someone for an informational interview to discuss their role, if you've spent time getting to know them and supporting their initiatives, they're going to be much more likely to accept. It's simple human nature. People enjoy helping those who have helped them. Finally, networking at its very nature is about creating an enduring connection with someone. It's not quid pro quo, and it's more than maintaining the status quo. It's no accident that the word work is part of the term. Networking requires work, and it results in growth just like all long-term relationships do. You have to continue to add value as the relationship progresses. And that can be as simple as checking in on someone from time to time. Now, hopefully for those of you who are uncomfortable with networking, this helps you reframe it in a more positive light. Before we get to our networking approach, let's focus on some foundational best practices. And I'm also going to be pointing out some common mistakes and what not to do.
Okay, I do have a question.
Yeah, go ahead.
So Ying, who's in the Salesforce Fellowship Program, wants to know, what are your tools for networking and which one's your favorite?
So every single job, every single opportunity, including the reason why I'm speaking to you right now, has come from one source, and that's been LinkedIn. So the best thing that you can do to create a brand, promote that brand, is to create a LinkedIn network, engage with relevant folks in that network, and then do the things that I'm recommending, which is create content and interact with other folks' content. That's the best tool possible. There's a lot of other tools out there, and we'll get into some of those on the resources slide, but that's where you should get started. And so if you don't have a LinkedIn profile, or if you have one and you're in your uniform because you're still in the military, or if you haven't updated it in a month, right? These are things that you need to fix. You should be in your LinkedIn profile, if not every day, every other day, refreshing it, reaching out to folks, building your network. All right, so how do we do that? How do we network? Engage early. Relationships cannot be rushed. It takes months to build trust, familiarity, and rapport with each person you choose to bring into your professional network. The more people that are in your primary network, obviously, the more time and work you must invest to build and maintain it. Trying to rapidly form a relationship to meet your immediate needs, that's going to be seen as transactional and phony. And so for these reasons, you have to begin networking within your desired industry as soon as you identify it. Be direct and to the point. In this digital age, it's a fact that people's attention spans have dramatically shrunk. As such, sending long-winded messages with unclear intent is not going to be effective. The other end of the spectrum can also be problematic. Sending what I call teaser messages, where you try to prompt the person to respond, "Hey, David," are equally annoying to the recipient and also equally likely to get ignored. Networking is about clear and direct communication. People do not have time to guess what you want and will not make time for those who are ambiguous and indirect. Give context. To increase the likelihood of your connection request being accepted, right? Provide relevant background and details without being overly verbose. It's a balance. On one end, you want to give context. On the other, you have to be direct. It takes practice. Super easy. Succinct message that includes context, establishes the value that you can add to that relationship. Connect with purpose. Networking must be purpose-driven and based on professional goals. Every interaction, everyone, should be directly or indirectly related to your strategic vision for your career. Don't reach out to connect with someone until you're clear on what you want to achieve from that relationship. Now, obviously, this isn't to say you shouldn't be friendly or chat with people. It's not what I'm saying. The point is, be strategic in how you spend your time networking. Avoid the spray and pray method, where you send out as many connection requests as you possibly can to as many different people as you possibly can, and then hope that anyone helps you land your desired role. As you might expect, not effective. Provide continuous value. While you should never ask for a favor in the same breath that you're introducing yourself, it is okay to ask for favors once the relationship is firmly established. The point here is provide value first and do so continuously throughout the relationship. If you can do that, your connection is much more likely to provide value in return. In order to know how to provide value, you need to research your connection to know what they value. Let me give you a quick example. If you're engaging with a content creator, such as myself, someone who creates and shares their ideas online, you can expect they value promotion and circulation of their content, right? So liking, commenting on, and resharing their content will be appreciated. Follow up. Finally, connecting is not one and done. It's about engaging with someone on a consistent basis over the course of your professional career. Once you've convinced someone to connect with you, the hard part's over. Don't squander the time and effort that went into that by letting your connection grow cold. Let's use our previous example. Interact on a weekly basis with that content creator, and so that you are able to maintain that connection. And the reason for this is simple. When you're ready to ask that person for help, your request will be seen as an opportunity for them to repay the value that you've been offering to them. All right, so before we move on, I want to offer some guidance on time management. Some of you have probably guessed, wow, this takes a lot of time. It can, all right? You don't have time to build relationships with everyone. As an example, I have nearly 18,000 LinkedIn connections. I've only had time to form relationships with a fraction of my total network, a couple hundred people at most. It makes sense then to focus on the connections where you have shared values, goals, and purpose, and where they are as willing to invest value in the relationship as you are. A one-sided relationship is not healthy and it's not productive. All right, so let's apply these principles to explore a simple approach to networking. I'm going to walk you through a basic approach. I'm going to break it down into 6 phases, and I'll use an example from my networking experiences. This is one approach, right? Each engagement is unique and will require you to modify your application of these concepts. Let me give you some background information to get started. At the time, I was relatively new to my industry and I was working to develop my personal brand. I was attending a national sales conference as a new consultant. Now, you can imagine this is a prime networking opportunity. I was looking forward to attending an evening event where I could meet a content creator who was thought of as a thought leader in my industry. He would be speaking on a panel with other cloud computing luminaries. Now for my approach. Phase 1 is the initial introduction. Though mine was face-to-face, doesn't have to be. Online introductions work fine, and they're likely more common these days. After the panel concluded, I approached the content creator, we'll call him John, and I introduced myself. I mentioned the company that I worked for and my current role within our shared industry. I let him know that I followed him on social media and that I enjoyed his content. This initial introduction accomplished several things. In sharing my company and role, I was establishing context for the relationship that I'd be seeking to build. Mentioning that I followed him on social media and enjoyed his content confirmed that I was a member of his target audience, further adding to the context. Finally, by enabling him to associate a face with a name, I established a way to be memorable. All I'd need to do in future conversations would be to reference meeting him at that sales conference. Now, obviously, there's an expiration date on that familiarity, so I would need to follow up relatively quickly. And that brings us to phase 2, adding value. Over the next several weeks, I begin to like his content posts on LinkedIn, reshare them with my network, and share my perspective in the comments. This promoted and increased the circulation of his content, which is a goal shared by every content creator. I was reminding him who I was, and I was adding value to the relationship, value that I would hope to capitalize on in phase 3, a small ask. Now, your initial ask cannot be the moon. It needs to be proportional to the value that you've added and something that is simple for them to say yes to. Once you get that initial yes and you repay them with more value from your end, you have just established a precedent and dramatically increased the likelihood that they will say yes to future and larger asks. Basic human nature. My initial ask, sent to him in a LinkedIn DM, was to reshare a piece of content that I created. This would only require seconds of his time, but would provide immeasurable value to my brand. In sharing my content, he'd be endorsing it and opening his much larger network to me. And the result will be a greater circulation of my content that I could achieve with my network alone. Now, because I had laid the groundwork earlier in the relationship, he said yes, and the reach of that content skyrocketed. We mentioned that networking is not one-off and it's not transactional, it's enduring. So I continue to add more value, which brings us to phase 4. In the weeks and months to come, I continued interacting with his posts and adding insightful comments. Now, I could have sought out additional small asks, but I didn't take this approach. My next ask was going to be much larger. I did not want to spend my networking capital. I wanted to add a disproportionate value from my end to increase the likelihood that he would agree to my larger ask. And that brings us to phase 5. Now, I recognize that I've laid these phases out in a linear flow. The process is anything but linear, and it can cycle between phases 2 and 6 according to the unique and unpredictable dynamics of each relationship. At this point in our professional relationship, I'd known John and had been interacting with him for nearly 2 years. Now, obviously, you don't need to wait this long before asking for a larger favor, provided you've invested in the relationship like we talked about. My next ask was to invite him to be a guest speaker for the weekly office hours that I had established to help military community members transition into my industry and ecosystem. Again, because I demonstrated a repeated pattern of adding value, and because my request aligned with his values of supporting our professional community, he said yes. I had made it easy for him to say yes because my ask aligned with his values and his brand. It's an important note to footstomp. Always make it easy to say yes to your requests by researching your connection to know what they value. And this brings us to our final phase, maintenance. Now, maintenance isn't so much of a phase as it is a mindset and a pattern of repeated interaction. Once you stop adding value and you disappear off their radar, you compromise your ability to derive continued value from the relationship. I recognize that the picture I'm painting here is completely utilitarian, which of course is not accurate. Relationships are seldom black and white, and as I mentioned earlier, they're not ruled by quid pro quo mentality. The point here is to keep the relationship going. To do this, you'll need to pay attention to how your connection's brand and values evolve over time. If you assume they're going to remain constant, that's a mistake. And it's one that could find you adding value in a way they no longer find valuable. To illustrate this point very quickly, if our content creator has moved from blogs to video and you're still promoting their older blogs to the exclusion of the newer video content, you're missing the boat. Equally, if not more important, as keeping your finger on the pulse of your connection's goals and values is doing the same for yours. Once you've created a brand and a network, how do you maintain them? We asked this earlier. Should they evolve and change over time? Periodically, you'll need to examine your brand, your branding strategy, the content you're putting out, and who you're sharing it with. And when doing so, you're going to want to ask yourself some questions. Have your values changed? Probably not, right? Since these are the bedrock principles that your professional ethos is built upon, but it is possible. So spending some time here to examine this is a worthwhile activity. Have your goals changed? This is much more likely. If you've accomplished the initial goals that informed your brand and the creation of your network, you're going to want to set some new ones. With your new goals in hand, you need to determine if your brand needs to change in order to achieve them, or if you need to change your networking strategy, who you're connecting with and why. If your values and your goals have changed, or either one, this will need to be reflected in your branding statement. Spend some time and redraft your statement. Remember, this is your brand's why, and it serves as your guide on your branding journey, ensuring your message is consistent. Finally, is your content still relevant, timely, and value-added? My industry, the technology industry, is famous for its rapid pace of change. Shouldn't come as a surprise then that your content may also need to change over time to retain and increase your follower base. Examine your engagement metrics, reactions, comments, reshares, to determine if you're losing your audience. If in answering these questions, you find that your brand or your network needs some tweaking, reevaluate and reaffirm your values, qualities, and goals, and begin experimenting with changes to your social media profiles, your future connections, and your content. All right, now I want to provide you with a practical example. I'm going to tie together all the concepts we've explored. I'm going to share a branding story with you, my branding story. When I introduced myself at the beginning of the presentation, I mentioned the challenges that I faced during my military transition, specifically pivoting from a planned career in program management to an unplanned one in tech. This slide chronicles the events taking place during the 12 months prior to my retirement up to today. The intent is to further reinforce that networking and branding are enduring activities, not ones you set aside once you achieve your initial goal. To get started, let me orient you to the map. I've included a legend at bottom right. White stars are decision points. These are inflection points during my journey where I need to make a critical decision that would influence my professional path. Red stars symbolize value exchanges between myself and my network connections. And blue stars stand for career opportunities that came into being as a direct result of my networking and branding activities. I've segmented the journey into phases, which characterize my main focus during that period. So let's get started. Dealing with the unknown unknowns, getting started. My story begins with the unsettling realization, as I mentioned, that the career I've been preparing for the past 4 years was not a good fit for me. With no industry background, experience, or connections, and limited time to build these resources before my retirement, I began my branding and my networking journey. I knew that breaking into a new industry would be challenging, and I'd need to stand out if I wanted to get hired. I also knew I needed to network and that a brand would help me do that. Problem was, no idea how to create either one. Compounding that, as I mentioned, my LinkedIn network was a hot mess. I'd been connecting with everyone and anyone across multiple different industries, completely negating the value of my LinkedIn feed, which didn't contain any relevant information. I needed to start over. And to do that, I would need some help. Thankfully, I overheard one of my colleagues mention that she had signed up for a free career development program, specifically tailored for the military community. And that's how I discovered ForBlog. Over the next several months, they would teach me how to network, develop a brand, and communicate my value to employers. A lot of the things that I'm sharing with you today. They also introduced me to several books, which I'll cover, that would influence and help shape my professional future and drive my journey. Together, these resources convinced me to conduct an internal inventory of my professional and personal values, principles, skills, habits, and preferences. Once that inventory was complete, I knew the type of jobs I'd be a good fit for. Program management was not one of them. I also knew the brand that I wanted to develop did not align with my current professional network. So at that point, I deleted my LinkedIn profile, the whole thing, and I started over with 0 connections. Career path selection and enablement, doubling down. Because I had invested the time to conduct an internal inventory, I was able to recognize when the opportunity arose to explore a career path that did align with my interests and abilities. One of my connections reached out and suggested I look into a large tech company. He mentioned they had a free learning platform and a free training program specifically designed for military community members. I explored both resources and I found everything I needed to upskill in a career that was both rewarding and interesting. So with my career path chosen, I was ready to implement my branding strategy, enhance my network with relevant connections, and create value by developing and sharing content. Now, this took form in many different activities. I was posting numerous times on LinkedIn, asking questions, sharing my achievements, and offering my insights. I also began attending community events in person and online, where I met future colleagues and several mentors. And in being the recipient of an incredible amount of support and encouragement from my community, I began very early to mentor those who were considering a similar path. This ad hoc mentorship continues today, and it's been an invaluable learning and development experience. The best way to learn is to teach others. So at this point in my journey, the top right corner of the path, you might notice a pattern. My journey began with decision after decision. And because I had conducted enough research and leveraged the resources that I'd found, I made the correct choices along the way. With my path decided, I understood what was valued in my industry, and I was able to contribute to that value. As I became better known through my value exchanges, I was introduced to opportunities. I have seen a similar pattern emerge from many of my mentees over the years. Thoughtful decision-making and value exchanges, creating opportunities. I knew that I would need work experience to get hired when I transitioned. So at this point, I leveraged my LinkedIn network to find and secure volunteer work opportunities, which I did. Over the next several months, I volunteered 30 hours per week, gaining valuable work experience and test driving, key concept, test driving my future career. At this time, my future company, Salesforce, was sponsoring 50 community members to attend their national conference in San Francisco. Hundreds of people applied, but I firmly believe you miss 100% of the shots that you don't take. So I applied for it. Now, I had been exchanging value with my professional community for several months by now, and I was beginning to develop a reputation through this and my branding activities. As a result, I was chosen to attend that conference, which strengthened my relationship with Salesforce, as well as the companies that I networked with during that event. Negotiating the job market. At this point, I had 4 months to go until I retired. I leveraged these experiences to find a company that was willing to partner with me for a DoD SkillBridge internship. I was their first SkillBridge intern, and I set that up myself by reaching out to them directly. This 3-month internship solidified my work experience. Over the previous 9 months, I had been sharing my journey on LinkedIn to drive interest from talent development professionals. During the final month of my military service, I had several companies reach out to me about career opportunities. Rather than competing with the rest of the job market for a single position, I had companies competing with each other to bring me in. In the end, all I had to do was choose. 0 applications filled out. On the day I retired from the military, I accepted a full-time role with a company that I had completed my internship with. Now, I'm specifically calling this out not to brag, but to emphasize that your strategy and the work you put into it will determine your options. If you want companies to compete for you, it is absolutely within your reach. Giving back at scale. The last segment of my journey spans a period of 3.5 years from my first paid tech position to today. With my brand firmly established, and we talk about brand evolution here, and with me embarking on a new career path, my goals shifted. And with them, the pattern of my journey also shifted because my networking and my branding strategy shifted. I no longer needed to carve a niche for myself in the ecosystem. Instead, I needed to nurture and evolve my network and brand, which would enable me to accomplish my new goal of becoming a thought leader within my professional community. To do this, I decided to focus on the quality instead of the quantity of my value exchanges, and I chose to scale my mentoring to reach a broader audience. My mentoring activities, which had previously been ad hoc and circumstantial, shifted to scheduled one-on-one sessions hosted on the premier military community mentorship platform, Veterati. If you're not familiar with it, look it up, please. After a year of one-to-one mentoring, I scaled my mentoring activities once again. I had noticed a gap in career exploration resources. So I launched a weekly office hours, still in place today, where I and others would collaborate to help military community members explore different career paths within my industry. These value exchanges did not go unnoticed, and I was approached to interview for my dream job at my dream company. After being hired, I would laterally transfer to a new role even better suited for my skills and interest areas, and that's where I'm at now. These last 2 opportunities represented unknown unknowns, roles that I didn't even know existed. And as it turns out, I fell in love with each of them. As we've mentioned, that is the true power of building a brand and networking, being able to take advantage of paths in your journey that you would never discover on your own. And now we've reached the present day and the end of my charted path. When Stephanie reached out to ask if I was interested in speaking with you, my answer was immediate. Of course, I wanted to continue exchanging value with my community, because you never know when or how the activities of today will open the doors of tomorrow. These unknown unknowns will always surprise you and keep your journey interesting. So let's take a look at some resources that I leveraged to help pave my professional path. Now, I know we're running close on time and I want to make time for questions, so I'm not going to go into each one of these. The question earlier, I think it was from Hannah, that asked about how'd you figure this out? What color is your parachute? Help me do that deep dive. And so those articles and books in the upper right-hand corner is a progression of things to read and do, and that will help you out dramatically. I do want to call out a couple organizations though, before we move on. So as you're probably aware, interviewing in a way that captures the attention of your interviewers and increases your chances of being hired is a critical skill, right? It's not one you're born with. It has to be learned. It has to be practiced. To that end, having the ability to participate in mock interviews with professional interview coaches is an invaluable resource. Candorful, Candorful, provides this service free of charge to service members, veterans, and spouses. 4Block, as I mentioned earlier, provides free career readiness programs that will equip you with the tools necessary for transitioning to meaningful careers in the civilian workforce. As I mentioned, they taught me how to brand. Now, before we move to the questions, I want to reinforce the key ideas mentioned in this presentation, and I want to leave you with some takeaways. These are some of the truths that I discovered during my journey. I'm passing them on to you in the hope that they will serve you well during your journey. And though I don't typically like to read slides to my audience, kind of boring, I'm going to make an exception to underscore these points. Right, here we go. Don't research and prepare for a career before you research yourself. Right? You've got to conduct that self-assessment. And those books, What Color is Your Parachute, the PwC Brand Assessment Workbook, those are your tools for getting that done. Branding and networking are career-long pursuits. Don't get hired and then put your brand on the shelf. As I've proven through my journey, you will use that brand in your network the rest of your career to scale to heights that you didn't even know existed, right? You can't access the unknown unknowns if you don't have some way of making them known unknowns and then eventually known knowns. And that is what your network does for you. Add value first, right? It absolutely establishes the relationship and it keeps it going, and it sets the stage for them to repay that value. Scaling the value that you provide will also scale the opportunities that you encounter, directly proportional with each other. More value, you get more opportunities. As I mentioned, mentoring has been one of the most professionally rewarding experiences of my life. Teach so that you can learn. And ABB, always, always, always be branding. You never know what doors you're going to be opening later in your career. All right. So before we open the floor for questions with about 8 minutes left, I want to thank you for spending your time with me today. I truly appreciate you. If you were skeptical about the value of networking and branding when we started, I sincerely hope I've helped to at least change your perception. Ultimately, this process will only work if you're willing to invest the time. Feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn. If you have your phone handy, you can scan those QR codes. The one on the left will get you my LinkedIn profile, and the one on the right, if you're interested in attending my office hours. It is geared toward the Salesforce ecosystem, but there are often gems that you can get from that as well. I often invite hiring managers, recruiters, resume experts. You're welcome to join. All right, so let me go ahead and turn my camera back on so you can see my face. And I'm more than happy to answer any questions you have.
Awesome. That was fantastic. We have a couple here. Here's an easy one. What's a book you would recommend for networking?
So on the other slide, there's a list of books, and I took you through a journey, right? And I didn't have time to explain it, so it's a good question. I appreciate the follow-up. First piece is figure yourself out. I didn't know myself when I was applying to be a PM, and that's why I didn't know that I wasn't interested in it. So What Color is Your Parachute? Richard Bowles, read that, do the exercises, right? It's going to take you a little bit of time. It will pay itself back. Don't say to yourself, I don't have time for that. You don't have time to fail either, right? So do the work, invest the time in yourself. That's the first piece. That brand workbook by PwC is phenomenal. And you can access that link, and then that's more exercises to figure out, now that you know who you are, what's your brand? How do you communicate that? And then to directly answer that question, the 2-hour job search, I'm a process-centric guy. I love process, you can probably tell. That is a very thin book on how to create a process to apply to your dream jobs and not go through the traditional path, like we talked about earlier, of hundreds of job interviews, maybe a couple interviews, maybe a couple follow-ups, and then maybe one offer. The 2-hour job search is the reason why I had companies coming to me, because I didn't invest time in that antiquated process. It's not the way to do things. Perfect.
So you talked about creating meaningful content, putting that out there, and that's how you start your following.
Yep.
How do you do that in the beginning when you feel like everybody knows more than you?
Yeah, in the beginning, everyone does know more than you, and that is actually a good thing. So a couple things. One, if you go to my YouTube channel, and the link is in the slides, I've got 2 different playlists and 30 videos on branding. And in there is a step-by-step process for how to create content. I show my LinkedIn posts. It's a guide. But to answer your question, as I mentioned earlier, when you don't know anything, what's the natural inclination? Ask questions. Okay, well, post those questions in a social media chat, right? People, especially in my industry, but I think people in general naturally want to help. And if they're on LinkedIn, they're there for a reason. They want to network and brand and help. So they're going to answer your questions. And in answering your questions, you connect with them, you form a relationship, you thank them, you figure out who they are. Oh, they're a thought leader. Let me follow their content. Let me develop that relationship. Let me add value. And then pretty soon you're buddies, and they're coming onto your office hours to promote your stuff instead of the other way around. It all begins with those initial posts to create your brand. And that can be asking questions. It can be achievements. So certifications are big in my industry. If you're a program manager and you earn your Scrum Master or your PMP or even your Sigma white belt, post about it. Talk about the process. And then as you experience things, as you go through the Hiring Our Heroes cohort, talk about it. That's integral to your brand. You're leaving the military, which should be a huge part of your brand, whether you're a spouse or a service member, and you are entering this new unfamiliar area. That's interesting to people. get them invested. Talk about that. Talk about your fears. Talk about your journey, your process. And in sharing that, you're going to, one, have other people comment and reshare that content, but it will bring others to you to help build your network for you. One of the other things I didn't mention on LinkedIn was, it's in the slide notes, the Veteran Mentor Network. Veteran Mentor Network. It's a group on LinkedIn, has over 100,000 folks in it. That's a great group to join and just ask questions. Any questions, any industry. There's thousands and thousands of people in there that are waiting for you to ask questions. And that's how I ultimately discovered Salesforce. That's how I got on my path, was I was in that group and I was like, I'm lost. And they're like, hey, have you thought about Salesforce? So.
Perfect. You touched on this a little bit, David, but if someone's at the end of their fellowship and their host company is not giving them an offer, how do you start then doing that networking if you haven't, without looking desperate?
Yeah. So if they're not giving you an offer, first and foremost, like your LinkedIn post should reflect gratitude for that opportunity. And in reflecting gratitude, you're also going to share that you're looking for work. And you're going to be highlighting yourself as someone who's completed a 12-week internship that's already trained, that is a valuable asset to add to their team. So I would leverage your experiences through the fellowship to create content on LinkedIn, to put that out there, add it to your resume, add it to your headline, hiring our hero cohort member, graduate, and use that in conversations when you connect with folks. Something else that I'll bring up, and I mentioned it briefly, but I want to touch on it, is once you identify, the company, the industry, the role you want, once you've done your homework, get those employee referrals. So for instance, if you want to work at Salesforce and you connect with me today and you show, you add value by sharing my stuff, and you don't just say, hey, Dave, I connected with you, give me an employee referral, right? If you spend the time with me to develop that relationship and you indicate, hey, Dave, I'm interested in Salesforce, here's what I've done to prepare for that career. I've gotten these certifications, or I've done these things. And I'm using Salesforce as an example. Apply this to any industry. And I see that you've done that. I'm going to extend that privilege to you of an employee referral, which will get you head of the line privileges when they're looking at your application. Now, when you do that, when you ask for that employee referral, obviously you have to do some things in advance. One, you have to have exchange value. Don't ask for that out of the gate. That's not what networking is about. Two, give that person the link to the job. Don't say, hey, I'd love an employee referral at company X, when company X has 75,000 people and thousands of roles. So like, I can't help you. Do the homework for them. Say, hey, I'm looking at this role. Here's the link to that role and the job rec number on your website. Here's my qualifications. And again, be brief, but be direct. And would you be willing to talk with me about that role and maybe extend an employee referral, and send them a copy of your resume. And I've had folks do that this week, right? I looked at them and I see that they engaged with me throughout a period of time. They identified the role, they gave me the resume, and I extended them a referral. And some of those folks, not the ones this week, it's too soon, but in the past have gotten hired. So always look for that inroad, that employee referral, which requires you to network and brand and do all the things that we've talked about today. But just because you may or may not be getting hired by your host company, honestly, if it was me, and I don't mean to put Stephanie or Iris on the spot, I would say, hey, Stephanie and Iris, company X is not going to hire me. Obviously, like, hiring our heroes is awesome, and I've done all this training. Can you ask the other companies that are participating in this internship if they might be interested? Because it's not the only company, and see if you can get some leverage that way. Or if they may know of an opportunity through their network where they can send you as a graduate of the program. And if that doesn't turn up anything, then again, I would leverage that experience. I would trumpet it on LinkedIn, mention it, put it on your resume, because now you have work experience, you've done the role, so that puts you ahead above everybody else who may be starting out that hasn't had that experience.
Perfect. That's a great way to end. I know we're up for time, and I know you have an important engagement right after this. So thank you very much for your time, your preparation, and obviously your expertise in this field. We really appreciate it.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Have a great weekend, and we'll be in touch.
Thanks, everybody.